In this video, we are gonna see, what if Naruto was neglected for his twin sister? Naruto x female kyubi. This is part 1, and before getting into video, I request you to check the author of this fanfic, and show some love and support. Naruto, and the Wolf Goddess by Vados 46, do check it out. All details in description. And if you want next part of this series, please leave a like, share, and consider subscribe. Let's get into the video. Also check out Patreon for uncensored spicy content, link in description. It was early July in the ninja village known as Konoha, the hidden village of the leaf. This village was known for being hidden in a forest of trees, despite the fact there was a road leading right to it. Conceded much, its strong shinobi that despite popular belief were rather weak individually and their only saving grace was their teamwork that the village boasted about that made them appear strong, and also the kindness of its people. Yeah, right. It produced great shinobi, such as the Senju brothers, Hashirama and Tobirama, who were the Shodai Mei and Nidai Mei Hokage respectively. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Sandai Mei Hokage and the sensei of the Sannin, also known as the Professor. Then there was Minato Namikaze, the fourth and current Hokage, who was known as the Yellow Flash in Konoha, due to his use of the Nidai Mei's Hiroshin no Jutsu. And other ninja who, while not being the Kage, were in their own right famous, such as Kakashi Hatake, Asuma Sarutobi, etc. Konoha was considered number 1 of the top 5 shinobi villages in the entire elemental countries, with Kumo coming in second, Iwa in third, Kiri, though while in a state of bloodline purges, was fourth, and Suna fifth. It was almost completely destroyed when on October 10th, the Kyubi attacked the village after it was ripped from its host, Kushina Uzumaki, formerly of Uzushiogakure, after the village's destruction, who was giving birth. The fox went on a rampage while under the influence of a masked man. We know who he is, who somehow found the secret location where Kushina was giving birth, thank a past obsessed Kakashi, killed the Anbu security detail, breached an S-rank barrier jutsu, and killed the midwives, Bawako Sarutobi and Taji, before taking Naruto the older of the twins hostage. Minato Namikaze, after saving his wife and both children, battled the masked man who proclaimed himself Madara Uchiha, and wounded him after relinquishing him control of the Kyubi, forcing the intruder to retreat. Afterwards, with the fox still running amok, still slightly under the influence of a Sharingan genjutsu, and pissed off that it was being attacked, Minato had to face the most difficult and heart-wrenching decision of his life, resealing the 9 tails into one of his twin children. After all, you want to preserve the balance of power. Jerk. After a minute of thinking, and with time running out, he decided to seal the Kyubi's young half into his daughter, Natsumi, whom he thought might inherit his wife's special chakra. However, large quantities of the Kyubi's chakra were still ravaging the village. Knowing he couldn't risk opening Natsumi's seal, with the possibility of the fox breaking out, he, under the light of a rising sun and setting moon, sealed the most of the excess chakra into his son, Naruto. Though unknown to him, he messed up a hand sign slightly, making what he, and those who knew for years of that event, presumed to be a pseudo-jinchuriki, and died while sealing the yin half of the Kyubi into himself. Somehow, by some miracle, Kushina survived the ordeal, happy to be with her children, though she left a pissed-off specter of the Shinigami that was now missing a hand, who disappeared but not before telling her something that she left unheeded. Of course, she now had to face the ultimate question from the villagers, elders, and village council that Tobirama set up during his reign as Hokage to lighten the load of paperwork he got. However, while the idea looked good on paper, it backfired tremendously as successive civilian council members gained more control of the village till the title Hokage in Konoha was only a glorified paper pusher position by Minato's short tenure, that he had planned to address his concerns for, if he had lived. Who is the container of the Kyubi? At first she planned to tell them the truth, though if she was smarter she would have said Minato sealed inside himself, which was partly true, but knowing of how much death and destruction was caused by the Kyubi's rampage, she knew the villagers and the elders would do everything in their power to make the new Jinchuriki miserable. Then there was the thought of her little girl being tortured and raped. So with a heavy heart, and knowing that her son will live a solitary life, without many friends, she announced that her eldest Naruto was the Jinchuriki. The reactions were what she feared, as the village elders and civilian council, with the exception of the Shinobi Council, sans the Uchiha head Fugaku, called for the young boy's death or turned into a weapon. It was here that Konoha's reputation in the eyes of Kahina Namikaze ne Uzumaki was shattered. Hiruzen Sarutobi, who was reinstated as the Hokage, immediately shot down both attempts and decreed that the older generation were forbidden to tell the younger of Naruto's status as a Jinchuriki. Of course, this didn't stop them from attempting to harm the young child. The Uzumaki Namikaze family lived happily together for 3 years, until Kushina eventually decided to train Natsumi in controlling the Kyubi's chakra. For some reason, she never offered Naruto the same training, and denied his requests every time. At first the neglect wasn't so serious, but as time went on it became worse and worse. Then Naruto's mother and sister distanced themselves even more from their nearly forgotten family member. That is where we come to today, as Kushina was training her daughter. Natsumi Uzumaki Namikaze was a 7-year-old girl who had shoulder-length blonde hair that was the same color like her father's was, with the exception that it had crimson highlights in it, cerulean blue eyes that any boy could get lost in, a beauty mark under her right eye, and a face like her mother with the exception that it was narrower and she had slightly higher cheekbones, giving her an aristocratic look, and had 3 whisker marks on each cheek. And was wearing a burnt orange and black track jacket over a mesh shirt and a burnt orange knee-length skirt with black edging that had a slit on the right going halfway up so that it wouldn't hinder her movement, in black sandals. Currently she was focusing chakra into her hand, which began to spin until it formed a rotating ball. "Yes, I did it. I finally did it," she shouted in jubilation, happy that she accomplished one of her father's signature jutsu, the Rasengan. Kushina smiled at her daughter, very proud of her. "Nice work, Natsumi-chan," said Kushina. "Keep this up and you'll be able to become a great kunoichi like me in no time." Natsumi smiled as her mother, who was wearing a high-collared, sleeveless white blouse under a long, loose-fitting dress with a wristband on her left wrist and standard shinobi sandals, walked up and gave her a hug and kiss on the cheek. Watching this from the top of a tree was Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, a few minutes older than his sister, who had spiky hair like Minato had, only a bit tamer, and that it was a silver starlight shade in color, kind of like Sophie Hatter's hair color in Howl's Moving Castle at the end of the movie, with white highlights in it and red tips. His eyes were the same shape and rich purple as his mother, but the rest of his face was a mixture between his father and the Nide maze, and strangely enough he had slightly tapered ears, and although he shouldn't have, but did, he had rich golden tan skin, even though he hardly went out of the house much. And he was currently wearing a mesh shirt under an unzipped burgundy sweatshirt, as well as black jeans that were ripped in a few places and slightly worn out, and black sneakers. He also had, like his sister, 3 whisker marks on each cheek, but instead of being thick like hers were, his were thin. In addition to the whisker marks he had 3 vertical scars underneath his left eye that he was born with, and extended to his left ear. The young boy looked at the scene with an indifferent expression on his face, but if anyone looked at his eyes they would see disappointment and envy. A small part of himself wished he was part of the family moment. But alas, he wasn't, due to his mother severely neglecting him while favoring his younger sister, who was, unknown still to the whole village, the real Jinchuriki of the Kyubi. He had asked his mother many times if she could train him since he believed he had some of the fox's chakra, but was turned away every time. The last and final time didn't end well, as while doing a basic chakra control exercise, tree walking, his mother caught him and yelled at him, calling him many hurtful words that no child deserves from a parent. After being scolded he was sent to his room, and entering it, coincidentally it was also the smallest of the bedrooms in the house, he curled up in a corner and cried his eyes out. Not noticing that they flashed a dull green for a second, praying to Kami why everything was unfair to him. It was also at that point where he lost most of his love for his mother and sibling. His misery, sad to say, didn't end at home though. Whenever he would leave the house, the civilians and most shinobi would either glare, insult, spit on him. No, it was not the Greek tradition of spitting at newlyweds, I'll tell you that. Or on many occasions gang up on him and beat him. He was also stabbed, poisoned, locked out of the house and nearly starved, mauled by various animals, was once chained to an iron pole in a thunderstorm and became a human lightning rod, and literally drowned and pronounced dead once for a minute as well, though every time the civilians and few random shinobi were done with him, he would heal until there wasn't a single scar showing. This happened because his mother and the Sandai Mei, though the both of them hated themselves for it, officially announced Naruto as the Jinchuriki of the Kyubi, she the council, he the rest of the village. Naruto inwardly sighed at that, He might not be the container of the fox, but one thing was certain, he did contain something that had certain properties of a biju. You see, what Kushina, or anyone in Konoha, didn't count on, or notice, was that the excess chakra of the kyubi, the Shinigami's right hand, and little bit of godly kai that was inside it, as well as some solar energy from the rising sun that was sucked into Naruto's seal as well, actually combined together and formed into a new entity. This entity, based on Naruto's feelings of wanting love and attention, as well as his sadness, hate, and cold judgment from the Shinigami, became Naruto's first and one of the only few friends he had. Naruto's lips twisted a little upwards, as he remembered how he met her. It was after the severe scolding he got from his mother, that while crying in the corner of his room, he passed out and went into his mindscape. Flashback: 1.5 years ago, Naruto's mindscape. Naruto woke up to find himself in what looked like a cedar forest where the trees looked as tall as 40-story tall buildings. But couldn't tell how light it was because the sky that he could barely see through the tree branches, that were way too far up to reach, was covered in dark clouds that were raining. If he could see the sky, he would notice it would be twilight out. Naruto, stunned, pinched himself to see if he was dreaming and became shocked when he felt it. What is this place? He thought to himself as he looked around, trying to see if he could find anyone else here. As he walked through the forest, he could hear the sounds of various birds singing, if that was possible, as well as some type of music that sounded like a chorus of men singing or humming if he listened closely. Zelda Ocarina of Time, Temple of Time, and felt calmed by the sound. And if he noticed, he would have seen the rain begin to lessen. But then, a new, and heartbreaking whimpering sound got his attention. Childlike curiosity, or something like it, getting the better of him, Naruto followed the sound, and soon came upon a clearing with the ruins of a temple inside, that had a small lake by it, with 2 statues that looked to guarding an entranceway. Walking through, he saw a flat pedestal in the middle of what used to be a room but was now overrun with bushes and trees, and on the pedestal he saw what looked like a white and black thing curled up into a ball. He then heard the whimpering sound again, this time coming from the ball, and carefully moved toward it. As soon as he reached the whimpering ball, he bent down and reached his hand towards it. Just as his fingertips touched it, the ball jumped, revealing the ball to a bipedal wolf, which was actually a wolf hybrid anthro. Shibuya Kutatoshia from DSNG Sci-Fi Megaverse as the model for the girl almost as tall as himself with long white hair, and really short white fur, where he could see her body not covered by a black cloak that gave her the appearance of having white skin. Sky blue eyes, and silver-slitted pupils, a violent crescent mark on the center of her forehead, and although he couldn't see them due to them being underneath the cloak, 3 pairs of folded wings on her back that if he saw them Naruto would have noticed every feather was edged in violet, and a bushy tail that had a violet stripe on it. But what shocked him is what it did next. "Ah, who are you?" the wolf girl said, causing Naruto to blink multiple times before. "Ah!" the silverette yelled as he jumped in the air and landed on his bottom. "Why, you just talked," he hysterically said after getting over his shock as he pointed to the girl, who gave him a slight glare. "Of course I can talk. Got a problem with it?" Naruto didn't know how to answer that, as he kept looking at the wolf girl. "What are you?" he finally asked the wolf girl after a period of silence, "and why were you crying?" The girl's eyes seemed to glisten with tears, and her wolf ears wilted a little at that. "Because I'm all alone," she said. "No one is here except me." Naruto's heart ached as he slowly approached the girl again. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "Since after the day your father sealed the excess chakra from the fur into you," she said, causing the eyes of the silverette to widen in shock. "How much do you know about the kyubi?" he asked, and the girl sniffed a bit. "The chakra your father sealed into you also had the fox's memories," the girl explained. "When it and its siblings were created by the Rakudo Sennin from the Jubi, to the day it attacked your village. When your father sealed the fox's chakra, he didn't know that he slightly messed up a hand sign and that the seal gathered some of your chakra, the chakra of a wolf that happened to be passing through the Shinigami's right hand, along with the energy in it as well as some of its memories pertaining to this world, and some lunar and solar energy from the sun and moon while they were rising and setting. Thus I was conceived. Though the moon also had chakra for some reason in it, which the seal also took a little bit of." Naruto's eyes nearly popped out at that. "Are you saying why? You're some sort of god?" he nearly shouted. "Kinda, it's complicated," the girl said, "and when I was born, I found myself here. Alone. Without the love of a parent, warmth of a companion or anything. Naruto looked at the wolf girl with sympathy as she started crying again. He could somewhat relate to the girl, since she reminded him of himself. "Do you have a name?" he asked, and the girl shook her head. "No, since no one was here to give me one." Naruto then did something that surprised the wolf girl. The starlight-haired boy walked over to the wolf girl and gave her a hug. "I know how it feels, being alone," he said as he stroked her hair. "How would you know?" the girl said while starting to get defensive. "You have your mother and sister." Naruto's eyes then gained a pained look at that moment. "My family doesn't see me that way anymore," he said, surprising the wolf girl yet again. "They both agreed that I'm not worth their time, and so they excluded me as their family." "Sounds like you really don't like them," the girl said. The silverette shook his head as if to say no at that. "I don't hate them. In fact, At that moment something seemed to snap within Naruto. As memories of the past came flooding through his mind, he came to a realization, and the light of innocence in his eyes dimmed a little as if he permanently lost something precious to him, like someone losing an arm or leg. "I don't feel anything for them anymore," Naruto said in a sad but cold voice. "I just wish they saw me as a son, brother at least once, and not have cast me aside." The girl didn't say a word, as she found comfort in the boy's embrace. Naruto looked at the girl, and could only smile as she unconsciously snuggled closer to his body, in his arms. "You said you didn't have a name, right?" he asked, and the wolf girl nodded. "Then how about I give you one?" The girl perked up at that. "Why, you would really do that?" she stammered, while Naruto gave her a wide grin that made her feel warm inside herself. "Of course. Everyone needs a name," he said, and the girl could only gape in shock, but on the inside her heart was bursting with happiness. "Now what to call you?" The silverette began to think of the names he knew in his mind, or read about, until one came up to him, causing him to smile. "Thea. That sounds right," he said, and the girl looked at him blankly. "Thea," the now named wolf Anthro girl said, to which Naruto looked down in thought. "Yeah, it means goddess or divine. And just so you know, Thea was the Titan goddess of sight and shining light of the clear blue sky which your eyes reminded me of. She was also the mother of the sun, moon and dawn. And the reason I came up with that name was that you were conceived when the sun and moon were both in the sky, and the dawn was starting. Thus it reminded me of her." Naruto said. "You like it?" The newly named Thea gave Naruto a look that he guessed was the wolf version of being shy. Luckily for her, he didn't notice that she was madly blushing. "I like it." Flashback end. Naruto opened his eyes after reliving that memory, and saw his family heading back inside as it was getting dark out. It had been a year and 6 months since that day. It made him happy to finally have a true bond with someone. Even if that someone was a young goddess. Not going to lie, I'm sure there are a lot of males and some females who would do anything to be in Naruto's shoes at this point. Speaking of which, Thea had grown a little as they found out that she could absorb chakra, heat, or sunlight through the seal. She was now at Two Tails' strength, and they had a theory that since she was part goddess, and that her power also partly came from nature, of which she could also absorb nature energy through the seal, then she would possibly reach 10 tails or even more, possibly, by the time Naruto would reach 14 years old. Naruto, also with the bond that the two shared, mastered the initial state where his irises would turn sky blue and his pupils turn slitted while becoming silver while his body was coated with an extremely fine layer of her chakra. As well as what he dubbed the tailless mode level 1, in which Naruto would then gain one set of wings made of chakra that looked like Thea's 3 sets, while being able to fly. And although there was a lot of effort involved to do so, let's just say it was a work in progress and leave it at that. And instead of her chakra being like the kyubi's corrosive red and black, Thea's was a soothing blue, white, and violet. And instead of hurting like the kyubi's did from what snippets he had heard from his mother and sister, Thea's chakra, although a little painful, was mostly pleasant. His thoughts were then interrupted, as Thea spoke through their telepathic link. "Are you sure it was a good idea not to leave them a note, Naruto-kun?" the young wolf goddess said. 2 weeks ago, after another beating, they decided to find a place away from the village to train and get ready for the academy. Of course, there was the part where Naruto thought his mother would try to stop him for some reason, so he decided to do it the stealthy way. "I'm sure Thea-chan," Naruto replied, "if she notices that I'm gone, or where I'm going to be living for the next few years, the Sandai may and she will send Anbu after me." Said girl gave a sigh at that and told him what had been on her mind for a while now. "You know, you could have always told her about me, Naruto-kun." Then she could have trained you along with your sister, she said. Naruto could only snort at that. It doesn't matter. Besides, I doubt anyone would believe me, even if I did tell them, Thea-chan. Thea could only look at her container from inside him sadly at that. Things had deteriorated between Naruto and his family even more. As Naruto had stopped talking to the both of them, thinking he would be yelled at or punished, he didn't make any suggestions of where they should go when they went out to eat, or where to shop, knowing his mother would always pick Natsumi's opinion over his. He decided it was best to stay quiet, and thus, when he trained, which at the time was only trying to do tree walking, leaf sticking, some physical conditioning for his body, some shuriken jutsu, as well as bukajutsu, and the Academy 3 since he didn't want to be caught, although he knew preforming the regular bunshin wouldn't work because of how much chakra he had, which was easily twice as much as Natsumi's, while also knowing that she would never be able to preform the technique because of how much chakra she had, which he roughly guessed was somewhere around mid-jonin level. He did it outside of the village, out of sight and hearing range of the Anbu, the Sandai Mei, who seemed to take an interest in his family for some reason, or more specifically him and his mother. But now, the civilians and shinobi were getting bolder due to the Sandai Mei's inaction to do anything, attacking him when he was just a few blocks away from his home. It's time to go, Naruto told Thea, as he placed a backpack on his shoulders, filled with food, water, some clothes, a few shuriken and kunai, as well as 3 scrolls, one filled with various jutsu like Kaiten, Gokakyu no Jutsu, Futon, Daitopa no Jutsu, Suiden, Mizurappa no Jutsu, Wild Water Wave, and lastly Doden, Doroku Gashi no Jutsu, and the other had supplementary techniques that he had written down, as well as the instructions for the Rasengan, and the last scroll was filled with high-end jutsu he thought would be cool to train with due to their usefulness. I still don't like the fact that you thought of that place you picked for us to hide in, Naruto-kun, Thea said, sounding a little uneasy. There's a reason why they call it the Forest of Death, you know. Naruto's face, however, sported a look of conviction as he hopped from tree to tree. Hence why no one will be able to look for us in there, he said, causing Thea's eyes to slightly narrow. And why wouldn't they? That place is a virtual death trap. Even the Anbu think twice before going into that place. Thea tried to reason, but Naruto kept going on. We're going in there, and that's final, he said, and the wolf girl's mouth opened and closed like a gaping fish, before sighing. You're nuts, Naruto-kun, she said, while Naruto chuckled. It's who I am, Thea-chan, he said, you should know that. The young goddess only gave him a deadpanned look. That's what concerns me. Naruto only laughed as he made a beeline towards their destination. Unknown to them, however, they were being followed by several blurs. 45 minutes later, outside perimeter fence of Training Ground 44, aka Forest of Death. I still think this is a bad idea, Thea said as they arrived at the fence to the infamous training ground. Are you a wolf goddess or a mouse? Naruto said, the only thing we have to look out for is that snake lady that lives here. The animals would most likely leave us alone because they would sense you. That doesn't mean that there are a few animals who are bold enough to attack us. The girl said, but before Naruto could comment on that, both of them felt several presences heading their way. She through her hearing, instinct, and sense of smell, while he had a version of the mind's eye of the Kagura-8 chakra sensor skill that he had read about, which stated that some Uzumaki also had it, only his was getting stronger by the year, and if it got a certain degree larger he made a note to rename the technique. Anbu, at least a few of them, Naruto thought, and one of them is Neko-chan. You mean that pretty Anbu girl? Thea said, and if Naruto was a bit older, he would have noticed the small bit of jealousy Thea had unintentionally let slip. Now's not the time, Thea-chan, Naruto said, just as 4 Anbu arrived on the scene. One of them had long purple hair, was wearing a white cat mask with red lines, a white cloak and a Konoha tattoo on her left shoulder signifying that she was a captain, and had a voluptuous figure accentuated by large DD cup borderline E cup breasts. Naruto, what are you doing here? The Anbu said, while Naruto still faced the fence, his face still having an indifferent expression. I need to be away from the village to be happy for once, and get away from those people, he said in a monotone voice, much to the woman's shock. The Anbu, Yugo Uzuki, knew his mother was neglecting him for his sister, and about his tortuous treatment the civilians and some of the shinobi who held a grudge against the kyubi gave him. Secretly she was disgusted by their actions and wished to do something about it, but outwardly showed no emotion to what they did and bragged about when they got drunk at the bar, but she didn't know it was this bad. "Naruto, please listen to me," the Anbu captain pleaded. "Whatever is happening at home between you and your family, you can talk to me about it. But for now, let's get you home." Even though Naruto was mostly indifferent, he still shed a single tear at the word home. "In my heart, I wish that place did feel like home," he said, much to Yugo and the rest of the Anbu team's confusion, "but I'm not wanted or needed there, since no one wants to give me even an ounce of love." Yugo's eyes widened at this. "Naruto, please. Don't talk like that." Naruto faintly gave a sad smile as he brought his hands into a hand sign. "Sorry, Neko-chan," he whispered, "but I need to do this. Kagai Bunshin no Jutsu." To the surprise of the Anbu, in 40 puffs of smoke, appeared 40 perfect copies of the young boy. "En Nani? Kagai Bunshin?" said one of the team members in shock while another gave their own response. "But he's not even in the academy yet. How can he know such an advanced jutsu?" Naruto, while still facing the fence, rubbed behind his neck, alerting the Anbu that he was the original. "I sorta broke into the Kagai vault where the forbidden scroll was, and copied the instructions for the jutsu, along with a few others," he said, before turning around and looking at the Anbu team, but more specifically Yugo. "And tell Kushina and Natsumi that despite all the neglect and abuse that they have done to me, I don't hate them, Neko-chan. But I no longer love them." And with a chakra-infused jump after his confession, Naruto and his clones sprinted into the forest. "Shit. What do we do?" shouted the last Anbu member, while Yugo cursed inwardly, knowing that one of the best uses for Kagai Bunshin was to use them to throw any pursuers off the original's trail. Turning her head to one of her subordinates, she gave her orders, "Go get Tenzo and another team. And find Anko while you're at it. She knows the place better than anybody." The Anbu nodded, then took off, and she turned towards the other two. "You two go in after him. If the trail you're following is a decoy, double back and try another trail." The two Anbu were surprised by that, but that place is infected with monstrous animals, bugs, and who knows what else is in there, one of them said, before they felt killing intent directed at them. "Get in there, or I will slice your legs off and leave you two for the predators in that forest to feast on," she growled out, making them quiver a bit. But what are you going to do?" the second one said, and swore he could feel her eyes narrowing underneath her mask. "I'm going to inform the Hokage and his mother," she said. "Now move." The two Anbu hesitantly, but surely darted into the forbidden training ground, and Yugo immediately turned around and sped off, heading straight for the Uzumaki Namikaze home first. Meanwhile at the house, Kushina Namikaze ne Uzumaki was in the kitchen of the house, cooking dinner for her family. As she thought about that, she remembered her only son, Naruto. A sad look crossed her face as she remembered how she neglected him for her daughter. She even remembered how she yelled at him after trying to do tree climbing, a basic chakra control exercise. The cruel words she used and the tone she used, frightened, confused, and hurt him. And she didn't even realize this until after he fled, with a look of despair and fear on his face. Afterward she wanted to apologize, and went to his room that night. What she saw when she entered the room made her regret even more what she did. Flashback. Naruto's room. Kushina walked up to the door that led to her son's room. She grasped the knob and turned it slowly, before opening it, and in a corner of her mind realized this was the first time entering the room. As she walked in, she noticed that his room was Spartan and plain, and by plain I mean plain, and frowned at the lack of material objects in the room, which reminded her of a prison cell if she was honest with herself with how bare it was, with the absence of toys, books, posters, or even clothes. Pushing away the thoughts of the state of his room for the moment, she noticed that Naruto was not on the bed, and began to panic, thinking he ran away, until she saw a mop of starlight silver hair belonging to her son on the other side of the bed. Walking to the other side, she froze and her eyes started to glisten with unshed tears as she saw her little boy sitting against the wall. Legs curled up, with his arms wrapped tightly around them, as if he was expecting to get hit. "Naruto," the former native of Uzushio quietly said, as she carefully walked forward and knelt down. She slowly reached her hand forward and gently laid it on his shoulder. Seeing no immediate reaction, meaning he was asleep, Kushina stood up and pulled the covers of his bed back. She then bent down and carefully picked him up, so as not to startle him awake, and gently laid him down on the mattress, and removed his shoes before pulling the covers over him. She took notice of the tear stains on his face, and felt disgusted at herself for overreacting the way she did that afternoon. She knelt and proceeded to run her ringers through his hair, which she felt was almost like the fluffy down from a swan chick. "I'm sorry, my handsome Sochi," she said, which she meant because Naruto was unearthly handsome for a boy, enough so that she sometimes swore his face was carved by angels, still keeping quiet so as not to wake him. "I didn't mean to react the way I did. I just..." She then shook her head at that. "No, there's no excuse. But please know that I still love and care about you. And I wouldn't allow anything to happen to you." She then reached over and gave her son a kiss on the forehead, and for some reason that she wasn't sure about at the time, also brushed her lips over his lightly just to get the barest taste of peppermint and raspberry from his mouth before pulling away in embarrassment, while trying to get her minor blush she developed under control. "I'll try to spend more time with you I can, all right. And I promise to start training you after I finish your sisters," she said, then stood up as a lone tear ran down her cheek and a small sad smile formed on her face. "Good night, my little maelstrom," she said, "I will always love you." And with that she left the room quietly, and let her son sleep. Flashback, and ever since that day, she tried to spend a little time for her son. But he would always leave very early in the morning, and wasn't seen much at all. Add to that Natsumi's study sessions for becoming the Namikaze heir that Kushina decided she would give to her, and training sessions took a lot of time. Mostly due to the fact that she was progressing very slowly in trying to control the kyubi's chakra, and learning the Uzumaki taijutsu style, the Uzuken, which mentally depressed Kushina since that meant it was impossible for Natsumi to learn the advanced katas and some of the high-end intermediate katas for the style, but was surprised since Natsumi looked like she had some sort of skill in fuinjutsu since she was moderately progressing in the art, and was currently at beginner level 6 in it. Add on to the fact that Kushina had also tested Natsumi to see if she inherited her special chakra for the chakra chains, which she did to a certain extent, but could only for the time be able to use the chains from the palms of her hands. And was also trying to come up with a training schedule for Naruto, to see him. However, she did promise herself that as soon as she had more time, she would try to bond more with her son. Her thoughts were disrupted by the arrival of her daughter and her Ka-gai Bunshin, with the former being carried on the latter's back, due to Natsumi overtraining herself in the hummingbird taijutsu style, a style that Minato used and created, which relied mainly on speed, while also feinting, and delivering brutal strikes on the body's weak spots and pressure points, which meant that one had to know about and study the anatomy of the body as well as being naturally fast to begin with, that Kushina found out she was oddly proficient in, like she was made for it, but used the style with her creativity and imagination. That resulted in Natsumi trying to combine what she knew of the Uzuken to the Hachidori style, which surprisingly started to show results in that her daughter had theoretically come up with 2 techniques for it. However, in order to perform them she needed to at least kick off the ground 10 times in the blink of an eye for one, and be able to harden her fingers to pierce iron for the other. The red-haired woman only sighed at her daughter's eagerness to become stronger. "Again?" she asked her clone, who sighed. "Yep," it said, while Natsumi gave a sheepish grin. "Sorry Ka-chan," said the female carbon copy of Minato, whom Kushina still missed even though for some reason she had started to sometimes forget general things about him, like his birthday recently, almost as if she had come to terms with his death and was moving on, where you would then only be a distant memory, she thought, as the clone placed Natsumi on the ground. Now Natsumi was partly spoiled, mostly because her mother's attention was more on her than her brother Naruto. However, she wasn't as arrogant as most spoiled children were. She helped clean around the house sometimes, if she wasn't hanging out with her friends, and sometimes even made attempts to spend time with her brother. But didn't have much luck because he would disappear to who knows where, outside the village. And when she did, she wanted to impress him by showing him what techniques she had learned by her Ka-chan and pervy Uncle Jiraiya when he came over from time to time, though to anyone else it would look like she was teasing him. It also didn't help that Natsumi spoke in a way that she implied Kushina loved her more than Naruto, which she might or might not have said a few times to him, to motivate him to gain their mother's approval, as well as pulled a few pranks. Then when people asked, she used Naruto as a scapegoat because she had seen other kids do it and getting away with it, and so not wanting to get into trouble and wanting to make friends and not knowing right from wrong, she went along with what the other kids were doing. Kushina also saw that Natsumi was a little envious of Naruto, due to how much freedom he got, but also saw she was sad for him when he was yelled at 1.5 years ago, and even though he hid it well, how lonely and depressed he felt, due to Natsumi's ability to sense negative emotions like her predecessor Mito Uzumaki. Kushina then smiled, happy that her little girl was not like a stuck-up Uchiha, no offense to her best friend Makoto and her eldest son, Itachi, even though lately he seemed broody and emotionless, which was kind of creepy to her. "It's all right, Natsumi," she said. "Now, how about you go upstairs, wash up and change out of your dirty clothes and get Naruto, dinner's almost ready." And with that, Natsumi, in a short burst of energy, bolted upstairs, while the clone puffed out of existence, causing Kushina to gain its memories and chuckle at some of her daughter's antics. Before she turned back to check on the food. About 45 minutes or so later, when she was setting the plates, a series of urgent and desperate knocks at the door were heard. "Sensei, open the door," shouted the familiar voice of one of Kushina's students, Yugo, and by the sound of it, was panicked. "It's important, open up." Kushina then went back into the kitchen and turned the stove and oven off, and then began to head over to the door, until she was stopped when Natsumi came down in a hurry with a set of new clothes on after a shower and still had a towel wrapped around her hair, with a panicked look on her face. "Ka-chan, Oni-chan's not in his room," she said, and the mother became concerned, as the knocking continued. "Sensei, open the damn door," Yugo shouted again, and this time Kushina went over and opened the door, revealing her student in her Anbu uniform and gear, her mask removed, and her face having an urgent and pissed-off look. "Yugo, what's wrong?" she asked. "It's Naruto," the purple-haired woman said, now making the mother and daughter worried. "What happened?" she said. "Where is he?" "He went into the training ground 44, Yugo replied, and the house was quiet at that, until... "What?" Kushina screamed, her eyes wide in horror at the mention of that training ground. "The Forest of Death. What's he doing in there?" the Uzumaki matriarch screamed out, now terrified for her son, for possibly the first time. "He felt he was unwanted and unloved, and decided the best way to be happy was to leave," Yugo said. As signs of anger appeared on her face, he also said that despite all of the neglect and abuse you have done to him, he doesn't hate you, but no longer loves you anymore. The mother and sister of Naruto were shocked by those words. Unwanted? Loved? Abuse? Kushina thought. "Naruto, you truly believe we didn't want you?" She was broken out of her thoughts as her student continued, "And that's not all. Apparently the civilians and some of the shinobi have been getting more brazen in their attacks on him, while the children play pranks and use him as a scapegoat to not get punished." Kushina's head snapped up at that. "Attacked?" she said in shock. While she knew that the general populace of Konoha were very antagonistic towards her son, she didn't expect them to attack him. Or for that matter the children of Konoha to use him as a scapegoat. Inwardly she was at least thankful Natsumi didn't do any pranking or frame him for them. However, she didn't notice Natsumi adopting a look of realization and then horror, which evolved into a mixture between sadness and despair on her face when she realized what she had unintentionally been a part of. Kushina's fists clenched as she realized how much of a fool she really was. "Yes, attacked," Yugo said heatedly, "and the both of you didn't even bother to notice. Since you were too busy giving your attention to Natsumi and training her to even care, sensei." Kushina wanted to etort, but decided to focus on Naruto at the moment and went over to Natsumi, who by now had tears beginning to well up in her eyes. "My Masumi," she said, "I am going to go with Yugo-chan to get your brother. I want you to stay here and lock all the doors and windows. Don't let anybody in or out, okay?" Natsumi, who was now on the verge of crying, nodded as Kushina went upstairs and into her room, and came back out in her Jonin uniform, with her hair in a high ponytail and 2 bangs going down the sides of her face. Road to ninja outfit. Though it was easy to see that it strained, and pushed against her large FF cup breasts that she could feel were still growing, though she felt lately that the growth spurts her breasts experienced were beginning to subside, and wide hips. Something that irritated her to no end, and decided to get or make a modified uniform for herself in the future. She also made a note to herself not to make fun of Tsunade's chest size anymore. That she had gotten after the birth of the twins, and unknown to anyone including herself. A small portion of the kyubi's chakra that was still inside of her, after the fox was ripped out of her, was part of the cause of her developing figure, as well as her deceptively insane hidden natural strength that could rival half of Tsunade's chakra-enhanced strength in her womanly form, and massive chakra reserves that were being enhanced by it. and was also part of the reason how she survived getting impaled on the kyubi's claw. "Let's go," she said as she walked out of the house with tears beginning to fall from her eyes, shutting the door behind her. Natsumi, now alone, looked out of the nearest window so she could see her mother and Yugo running down the street. "Oni-chan, please be alright. And I'm sorry," she thought, as the first of many tears fell from her right eye. With Naruto currently, Naruto was hopping from one branch to another, as he traversed the gigantic trees of the infamous Forest of Death. And so far, he hadn't run into any of the monstrous beasts he had heard about. The Anbu that had been tailing him, which was part of his plan to ditch them when he put his hand behind his head to alert them to himself, each went after one of his Kagai Bunshin, not knowing they were following a decoy after he used a Kawarimi with several different clones, and sent the rest to make traps to stall anyone else. "Well, at least my decoys have them going the wrong way," Naruto said to Thea, while she just sighed. "Yeah, that worked at least," the wolf-themed goddess said, "but now we have to worry about the animals and the snake lady. Also, it's getting late, and despite your Uzumaki longevity, you need to find a spot to crash for the night. And I suggest someplace high up in a tree." Naruto shook his head at that. "No, that would be obvious," he said. "We need to find someplace where it will be easy to hide, and harder for them to find." Thea could only blink and sighed. But before she could talk to Naruto, her animal senses caused her to stiffen. "Naruto-kun." "Stop," Thea said, and the host of the new goddess did just that. "What is it, Thea-chan?" Naruto said, concerned for his best friend's warning. "We're being watched, and it's not Anbu, those blank masked ones, or any other Konoha ninja," Thea said, greatly alarmed. "I just caught a scent through you. It's wolf, but it's different." Naruto blinked at that. "How different?" Thea sniffed a bit. "It smells strong, old. Also, the closest thing that comes to my mind is prehistoric," she said, and her eyes widened. "And they have surrounded us. I can smell at least 10 of them." Naruto's eyes widened as he pulled out a kunai from the backpack while listening and looking all around him, and inwardly being thankful he had the insight to bring some basic hand weapons with him. It was half a minute until he began hearing something. Growls and snarls were heard, before out of the shadows appeared a dozen wolves. But these were different from standard wolves as they were stronger and extremely larger than what Naruto read about. They were around 18 meters long and looked to be a few tons. Their fur was white, except for 2 blue markings underneath each of their eyes, that had black sclera and pink irises. He also noticed that they had manes. Now, however, Naruto was inwardly beating himself up for not having the idea to bring a weapon such as a spear or a sword to use for protection, which now that he thought about it would be pretty cool if he learned to use one, and decided that the first opportunity he got, he would learn Kenjutsu if he got out of this situation alive. The wolves then began to circle around the nervous boy, who was sweating bullets. "Hey, Thea-chan," he said to his eternal companion, "if I let you take over my body, would you be able to talk with them?" Thea felt uneasy at that. "I don't know. These guys are a different breed than what I'm familiar with. I can tell just by the size and smell," she said, although she felt that they were kin for some reason deep inside her. But before Naruto could respond to that, a sharp howl that reverberated to the bone caught their attention, as the supposed leader of the pack, who was 22 meters long, with a scar running down the left side of its face, had both of its eyes boring into his own. "This doesn't look good," Naruto said, as the wolves began to approach him. "Naruto-kun, kneel down," Thea commanded, while her container blinked. "That's the matriarch of this group. I can tell by the scent. Kneel down, or she'll attack you." Naruto took Thea's advice and knelt down so he wouldn't be mauled to death by the she-wolf. The wolf continued its approach before stopping in front of Naruto and began sniffing him up and down. This is starting to get weird," Naruto said nervously. "Just relax, Naruto-kun," Thea said, as the wolf continued to sniff before its eyes widened and began to back off. Naruto blinked in confusion, while still feeling nervous at the she-wolf's actions. Now what?" he thought as the wolf then turned and seemed to glare at the other wolves, which resulted in them backing off and heading back into the forest. The female wolf then turned toward him and surprised Naruto by jerking her head to the side, as if telling him to follow her. "What should we do?" the young starlight-haired child thought to Thea, who only shrugged. "We got nothing better to do. Let's follow her," the young goddess said, and Naruto hesitantly began to follow the she-wolf. Meanwhile, in another part of the Forest of Death, Get the hell out of my way, an angry, desperate voice shouted out, as a large beetle fell to the ground with its head cut off. The voice belonged to none other than Kushina Namikaze ne Uzumaki as she cleaved her way through many of the vicious beasts in the forest of death that were foolish enough to get in her way. Following behind her was none other than the Sandai Mei Hiruzen Sarutobi, Yugo, Tenzo and Anbu, who was once part of Orochimaru's experiments to recreate the Mokuton, a few other Anbu, as well as the Forest of Death's only resident, Anko Midarashi. They stayed a few paces as Kushina had borrowed a katana from one of the Anbu, and was slicing, dicing, or using any sort of jutsu she knew on the unfortunate creatures to cross her path. I know I can be a sadist, but even I know not to mess with a mother who is a strong S-rank kunoichi, Anko said with a small amount of fear, as she watched as Kushina proceeded to beat a giant tiger's skull in when it tried to swipe at her. Hiruzen could only look on with worry, seeing the state of his late successor's wife was in. He knew she was desperate to find Naruto, as everyone else was the same. But he could see that she was starting to become fatigued, and had used a lot of her chakra. He had to do something, or else she would hurt herself. Kushina. Please stop, we have to go back, he said, as he saw her now strangling a large fox with a certain vindictive smirk on her face, issues much, with her chains before using them to slam it to the ground, and turned to look back at them with a look of anger in her eyes. I'm not leaving Naruto out here in this damn place. I'd rather rot in hell than go back without him, she argued, as she back-fisted a huge bear in the face that was about to attack her, making said member of the Ursidae family fall to the ground swirly-eyed. We want him back just as much as you do, Hiruzen retorted, but with your current condition and you overusing your chakra, you could end up killing yourself. Kushina could only narrow her eyes as she kept moving forward. By now all the creatures in a 1-kilometer radius were now hiding in fear from the red-headed woman's wrath. You can all go back if you want, but I'm no she gasped out as she felt a chop to the back of the neck, her senses not warning her of it, due to her focusing them on getting her son back, and falling to the ground unconscious. I'm sorry sensei. But for your own and Natsumi's sake, I have to stop you, Yugo said, as she sighed, then picked an unconscious Kushina off the ground and turned to Hiruzen, who had a solemn look on his face. Come on everyone, he said, we'll continue looking for Naruto in the morning. With that the team of shinobi vanished, as they departed the area, with Yugo's last thoughts being, Naruto-kun, be safe. Back with Naruto. Naruto yawned as he continued to follow the she-wolf. It was dark out and he was tired. How much further do we have to go? He thought, as they continued walking. I can barely keep my eyes open. Just hang on for a little while longer, Naruto-kun, Thea said. I have a feeling we don't have to wait much longer. Naruto didn't say anything as he rubbed his eyes. It was another 40 minutes, before the she-wolf stopped between two humongous trees that even for the Forest of Death were big, and gave a howl that jolted Naruto out of his drowsiness, and made him hurry up towards where the she-wolf was. When he got to where the she-wolf's head was, his eyes widened as he saw what looked like a village half the size of Konoha surrounded by a large wall, with the hugest tree he ever saw in the center of the village, and behind the village a mountain range that looked like it was some distance away. However, the village looked as though it was mostly abandoned for a long time, save for what looked like a few silver, white, and platinum-haired men and women living in it, due to the tall grass and the vines on the walls. He was even further surprised to see whole scores of wolves living outside the walls. Well, this is something new, he said quietly, before he was nudged forward by the she-wolf and continued walking forward with said wolf behind him. The other wolves looked at him curiously as the she-wolf followed behind. I got a bad feeling about this, the Silverette thought as they entered through the gate of the village. You're not the only one, said Thea, as they walked forward down the street toward what looked like the largest building that was at the base of the tree in the center of the village. Which was a castle, Saruga Castle, but it was partially covered in vines, and like the surrounding buildings, were made of stone that was a gray color. He could see a duo of wolves that were colored the same as the she-wolf, only they had brown streaks in their fur standing guard, and when he stopped, only to be nudged by the she-wolf again, the guard wolves snapped to attention and began growling threateningly. The she-wolf moved in front and gave a series of small growls and barks, which made the two guards stand down. Then the she-wolf turned towards Naruto, and to his shock spoke. Inside human, the wolf said in a clearly female voice, but its mouth didn't move, meaning that it was telepathic. Why, you can talk? The silverette said, while the wolf nodded. Only through thoughts, until I reach Omega. The wolf said, and I heard every word you have spoken to your tenant since I first saw you. Naruto's eyes widened at that, but before he could speak, the she-wolf told him again to go inside the building, telling him she'll explain later. With no other choice, and not wanting to piss the she-wolf off, Naruto went inside the building. One of the guard wolves led him through a foyer, and several hallways before arriving at what looked like a living room of sorts for a house, before arriving at a set of stairs. After climbing them they arrived at a bedroom that was in moderately decent condition, with a bed, closet, desk, and a shelf beside the desk full of books ranging in all manner of subjects, a bedside table that had a lamp on it for late-night reading, and small bathroom connected to it, as well as a few windows, and in one of them the she-wolf was watching him with one of her eyes. And upon arrival the guard wolf left, to return to its post. Get some rest, child, the she-wolf said, and all of your emotions will be answered tomorrow when you meet the alpha of our pack. She then began to leave, but before she took a few steps away from the building, Naruto stopped her. Wait. Can you please, at least tell me what your name is? He asked, as he opened the window she had previously been looking through, and the wolf turned back and answered him. It's Shakan, the wolf said, now, rest. With that said Shakan left, leaving the boy alone in the room. Naruto sighed as took off his backpack and laid it down next to the bed, and sat down on the bed, and was amazed at how comfortable it felt. Man, I was not expecting this, Thea-chan, he said as he positioned himself and laid down on the bed. I know, Naruto-kun, Thea said, but for now, let's sleep. We'll find out more in the morning. Naruto nodded, then took the covers of the bed and pulled them over himself, and fell asleep. Kushina's eyes snapped open as she found herself back in the living room of the family's house, which, while not the size of a humongous 5-story mansion, was around 3 stories with an attic and has 2 basements, which the first basement had a sauna, steam room, indoor pool, weight room, and janitorial closet. And the second basement was a large indoor artificially created training field that had a small waterfall that had a stream connected to a decent but shallow lake, and a small forest with a clearing that had several wooden posts that had repair seals on them which regenerated the posts whenever they were damaged in it for taijutsu and kenjutsu practice, and that the ceiling had seals which made it look like the sky outside, and to mirror the weather, without any negative effects. While the first floor had a foyer, ballroom, formal living room, formal dining room, formal meeting room, family living room where Kushina was currently in, family dining room, kitchen, 2 bathrooms, miniature clinic with a small bathroom, janitorial closet, an indoor greenhouse, while the second floor has 12 bedrooms ranging in size and 4 bathrooms, along with a master bedroom that also has a bathroom connected to it, while the third floor had a large library and a study for more creative and dangerous techniques stored inside it, while the attic wasn't really an attic but a sunroom that had a large indoor garden growing inside it. Now the strange thing about all of this was that the whole place was black, white, and gray, while only she was normal. The confused woman looked at her hands, with a look of utter shock on her face. What's going on? Where am I? She thought to herself, but was cut off as she began to hear a voice that she immediately identified as herself. And by the sound of it, the voice was yelling at someone. It then hit her, as her eyes widened and she ran for the kitchen, where she saw the calendar and her heart sank. She remembered this date all too well. No, please not again, anything but this, she screamed in her head, as the yelling outside intensified. She then bolted for the back door that the kitchen was connected to, and opened it, and to her shock and horror, saw a colored version of herself, and Naruto in the equally colored backyard, with the latter looking terrified as tears ran down his cheeks. You stupid little bastard. What were you thinking doing a chakra exercise without my permission? The past Kushina yelled at Naruto. But Ka-chan. The young starlight-haired boy said, only to receive a hard slap from past Kushina. That's enough out of you. I can't believe a little waste of space like you would try to pull a stunt like this. The past Kushina screeched, making the present Kushina wince at the words, as tears leaked from her eyes and fell down her cheeks. No. Stop this. Please. She begged to any deity out there to stop this travesty, only for it to fall on deaf ears as the specter of herself continued to shout at Naruto, who was now curled up in a ball crying. Then, to her confusion and unease, a sinister grin formed on the mouth of her past self. It's obvious that you are an incooperative little shit stain, said the past Kushina while a dark sinister gleam appeared in her eyes. And I know what happens to incooperative little brats, she said while the real Kushina looked on, clearly confused by this. Wait. What's going on here? This is not right. I sent Naruto to his room, Kushina thought, as past Kushina pulled out a Hiroshin kunai while making a clone. And it's not like anyone would care. The whole village already despises him, so they'll see this as a blessing rather than a murder, past Kushina said, making present Kushina's eyes widen in horror at that. Before any thought of doing anything to help Naruto could enter her mind, the clone of her supposed past self used rusted spiked chakra chains that came out of her back, and strung Naruto up by the neck while slightly cutting into it, drawing a little blood, and spreading his arms and legs out. His face now showing true fear as he looked at both past Kushina and her clone. Keika-chan. Please. Naruto begged, but the grins on both of their faces only increased. Sorry, Naruto-chan. But I never wanted you. Natsumi is my favorite, and I could always go into town and make her a new little brother, the past Kushina said in a sickly sweet sing-song voice. And then another chakra chain came out of the clone's back, and the kunai tip went speeding at the 5.5-year-old, piercing him in the shin, which resulted in the little boy screaming out in pain. The real Kushina looked on in horror at what just happened. She remembered clearly that this is not what happened. No. This is wrong. This is all wrong. The Uzumaki screamed at herself. This isn't what happened. She then saw past Kushina fling the Hiroshin kunai behind Naruto before disappearing in a red flash, then reappear behind Naruto, with a familiar spiraling ball of chakra in her hand. Rasengan. Past Kushina shouted as she slammed the chakra ball, which was about twice the size of a regular one, into Naruto's back, carving a spiral trench into it that began to splurt and leak blood from the wounds, causing said boy to cry out in agony. While some blood landed on past Kushina's face, which she licked off, and in doing so, she briefly got an orgasmic expression on her face. No, stop it, Kushina screamed as she tried to run and help her son, only for something to grab onto her left ankle and cut into it. She looked down and saw what looked like a black and green vine covered in thorns and had pulsating indigo veins, growing from the ground and wrapping itself around her ankle. She reached for her kunai pouch, but was shocked to find it not on her thigh. She is still wearing the Road to Ninja outfit, desperation taking hold. She clawed at the thorn-covered vines, trying to get free to save her child from this torture. Let go of me. She then heard another scream and turned back, her eyes widening as another chakra chain impaled itself into Naruto's other shin, then two more to his forearms. Panic settled in as the red habanero now struggled more than ever to get to Naruto, but then more black and green vines grabbed her right wrist and yanked it back, while cutting into it as well. Kushina then watched as the past Kushina, whose clothes turned into a skimpy crimson dominatrix outfit, suddenly began turning into a taller, demonic, ugly version of herself, who grew from her and present Kushina's height of 5 feet 4 to a solid 6 feet 0, and her skin turned chalk white, while most of it horribly burned, and what didn't burn grew horrendous boils that secreted a dark indigo ooze that smelled foul, like it was from a decayed 5-day-old corpse, and when it hit the ground that the ooze dropped on would begin to melt, meaning that the ooze was extremely poisonous. Her hair became a greasy mess with clumps falling out while it gained white highlights and tips. While 6 yellow horns grew out of the sides of her head, they looked like Vasto Lord Ichigo horns, where a pair faces up, another down, and a pair in between them was straight out. 2 rabbit ears that were made out of a bone-like substance grew out of the top of her head. They looked like Kagaya Otsutsuki's horns. 4 crimson wings that had white spikes on the undersides of them grew out of her back, with the lower pair circling around her hips. The wings looked like the ones that Giratina has, and a horribly burned foxtail that had clumps of hair missing in the places it wasn't burned growing out of her spine that if she looked closely would have been crimson with a white tip. And a white half-bone mask with razor-sharp pointed crimson teeth set into a sinister grin formed over her mouth and neck, and her eyes became 2 glowing red orbs in black pools. And lastly a black hole that was of a decent size opening up in her enlarged chest area, which grew from past Kushina's current FF cups to solid J's where her heart should have been, with the same thing happening to the clone except it had blue skin and a black dominatrix outfit instead. Then all of a sudden 2 guando burst from the ground, their blades rusted and old that had a red tint to them with thin trails of smoke coming from the tips. Now for the final touch. The now demonic Kushina said as she took hold of one of the guando and yanked it out of the ground and began twirling it with the skill of a master, with the clone following suit. Yes. It's time to put this bad dog to sleep. For good. The clone said as it stabbed the blade end into Naruto's stomach, upon which the area around the blade began to burn, showing that the guandos were extremely hot, and forcing a strangled cry of pain from the young silverette. Then the past demonic Kushina proceeded to skip towards the chain-bound boy, while still twirling her guando. "Oh Naru-chan, Naru-chan," the demonic Kushina said, as the real one continued to struggle while watching what was happening not 15 feet in front of her, and as this torture was going on in front of present Kushina, the vines were continuing to dig into her left ankle and right wrist. "If only you were a good boy, then you wouldn't be having this punishment." Present Kushina could only growl as this thing spoke to her son, but what the demonic Kushina did and said next made her blood freeze. "It is a pity, I'll miss that delicious blood of yours, but now, you die." With that phrase, the demonic Kushina shoved the guando into Naruto's neck. Said boy then began choking on his own blood as his eyes went blank, and his throat began burning. However, what was strange was that the demonic Kushina was looking straight at present Kushina when she did it. The look of horror on Kushina's face was clear as day as she saw one of her precious children die in front of her. And no. No. She screamed just as the vines, chakra chains, and the demonic version of herself and its clone vanished, when Naruto, who still had the guando in his neck, hit the ground. The distraught mother immediately rushed over to her son, ignoring the pain in her left leg and right arm for the moment, and scooped him into her arms, after being as careful as possibly being able to, given her circumstances, to remove the polearm from his throat. Not noticing that the guando repaired itself, and in case you were wondering, it's a golden dragon guando and that the dragon on th blade is red, the tassel is black, the gems are dark indigo in color, and that the guard is made of red gold. Tears cascaded from her eyes as she looked at his small burnt, unmoving body. The world around them, save for the guando that was now in perfect condition, fading into darkness. "Naruto! Naruto!" Kushina wailed, as she tried to wake him, but with no results as his eyes were glassed over and lifeless. The mother, seeing no response, cradled her son's body, while rocking back and forth. "And Naruto. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, my baby," she said, in complete despair. "Why?" A voice barely above a whisper rasped out, causing Kushina to jerk her head up and look around, only to hear a rasping breath coming from her supposed-to-be dead son. Looking down at Naruto, her eyes widened in horror as she saw his face, in which he had slightly thicker whisker marks, 2 fangs coming from his mouth, and eyes that were sky blue with a slitted silver pupil. "Why do you hate and forsake me?" For those of you who are 15 or so and younger, you can read now, unless you disregarded the warning. Then in that case disregard this captioned sentence. End of nightmare. Kushina jolted awake with a scream, sweat covering her entire form and drenching her clothes. She was in the master bedroom of the family home. Remembering the horrifying nightmare she curled up against the head of the bed and started crying. Then numerous footsteps were heard as the door flew open, revealing a concerned Sandai Mei Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi. "Kushina. Are you all right?" the Sandai Mei said worriedly, as Yugo, along with 2 other people, which were Kakashi Hitaki, and another Anbu with a cat mask. They watched as their Hokage headed over to Kushina, who looked as if she had seen the devil himself, or in this case herself. "Kushina. Kushina, talk to me," Hiruzen said as he carefully placed a hand on her shoulder, which resulted in Kushina jerking her head up and backpedaling against the wall. "Kushina, calm down, it's me," Hiruzen said as he moved toward Kushina, which seemed to scare her more. Knowing he had to do something fast, he moved forward and grabbed the clearly distraught Uzumaki, who began to struggle with much distress. "Shush, Kushina, shush," the old Kage said calmly, and repeated the process until she calmed down, and then hugged, not in a perverted fashion, the Hokage and began sobbing. "It's okay, Kushina. Now, tell me what happened." However, Kushina could only cry more as she remembered the horrible nightmare. Can't. It was so horrible," she cried out between sobs, and Hiruzen then turned to the cat-masked Anbu. "Go and get Inoichi. Now, tell him it's an emergency, and that I need him right away." The Sandai Mei ordered, The Anbu nodded, then vanished in a shunshin. It was at this moment that Natsumi, who up until this point had been crying her heart out on the bed in her room and had recently stopped, had heard her mother scream, followed by numerous footsteps outside her room. So deciding to find out what the cause was, she came in, though if anyone noticed they would have seen that her eyes were puffy, concerned about her mother. She was about to speak, when Kakashi stopped her and shook his head. "Your mother just had a nightmare, Natsumi-chan," he said. "It would be best if you didn't disturb her right now." Natsumi wanted to protest this, but knowing she wouldn't win an argument and that she was tired, simply nodded, and left with Kakashi. Yugo stayed though, and as she looked at her sensei who was being comforted by the Sandai Mei. The regular type of comforting when one person comforts another, any other way is just wrong, was curious about what the nightmare had been, but also had a good suspicion as to what, or who it was about. About 20 minutes later, Inoichi arrived and saw the state the former Jinchuriki was in, and immediately knew that this was bad. "Hokage-sama, I came as soon as I was informed by the Anbu," the Yamanaka clan head said as he approached the two. "And a good thing you did, Inoichi," Hiruzen said as he continued to hold his late successor's wife. "Kushina had a nightmare. And judging by the way she woke up from it, I can only guess it was a terrifying experience for her." Inoichi nodded as he looked at the quietly sobbing Uzumaki, as she uttered her son's name over and over. "And you want me to use my Shintenshin no Jutsu to see what her nightmare was," he said, knowing perfectly well what the Hokage wanted as he nodded his head. "Yes, I need to know what it was about," he said, and Inoichi nodded as he turned to Kushina. "Kushina, listen to me," Inoichi said, getting the woman's attention as she lifted her head, revealing her tear-stained face and red puffy eyes. "I know you just woke up from a nightmare, but I need to go into your mind and find out what it was. Can you relax so that I can do this?" Kushina was silent for a bit but hesitantly nodded her head, as Hiruzen stood up and gave the two some space. After bringing a chair to the side of the bed, Inoichi instructed Kushina to get on it, and when she did he raised his hands in the signature hand sign for the technique, before going limp and inside Kushina's mind, causing said woman to also go limp and fall onto her pillows. It was around 15 minutes later, when Kushina and Inoichi woke up again with a start. The latter's face, even though he worked at the torture and interrogation department and was desensitized to such things, was showing shock and horror. "Kami have mercy," he said, as he placed his hand on his head in order to alleviate the memories of the hell he just saw. "Inoichi, what is it?" Hiruzen said in worry as he helped Kushina sit back up. The Yamanaka clan head could only look at him with a pale face, his eyes showing a 1,000-yard stare, and shaking at the images he observed as well. "I can only say this, Hiruzen," he said calmly, but with a tinge of fear in it. "What I saw in there, you wouldn't like it." Hiruzen blinked at that. What was so horrible, that it scared Kushina, who was normally brave, half to death? He then moved towards the Yamanaka, who looked as if he was ready to vomit. "Let me see it," he said firmly, making Inoichi and Kushina jerk their heads toward him. Hiruzen, "No, I don't want you to see it," Kushina begged, with Inoichi agreeing with her. "Trust her and me on this, Hiruzen. You don't want to," he argued, as the old Hokage nodded. "You're right. I don't want to," Hiruzen said, until he gave a determined look, "but I need to. Because whatever it was that frightened Kushina so bad, it no doubt concerns Naruto, and that I am also partly responsible for what had happened to cause him to run." He then narrowed his eyes. "So I am ordering you, Inoichi. Let me see what you found in Kushina's mind." Kushina looked at the old Kage with worry. Hiruzen. Inoichi could only blink at that, but motioned for Hiruzen to sit. "Don't say that I didn't warn you," the Yamanaka clan head said, as he proceeded to share what he saw in Kushina's nightmare. When Inoichi finished, he immediately saw the reaction he knew would happen, as Hiruzen paled, and proceeded to grab the nearest wastebasket and puke his guts out. Merciful heavens! He thought to himself, that was. I don't even know how to describe it. The Hokage, after he stopped hurling his stomach contents out, which was whatever he had for dinner, and settled down, stood up and walked towards the bed and proceeded to wrap Kushina in a hug. "Listen to me, Kushina. What you saw in that nightmare wasn't you," he whispered into her ear. "That never happened, and never will happen. I know you would rather kill yourself before you ever hurt one of your children. Especially Naruto." Kushina, after hearing Hiruzen, only began to sob more as he then turned towards Inoichi. "Thank you. You can go home now, Inoichi." he said, and the man nodded before whispering something into Hiruzen's ear, then leaving, along with Hiruzen, who left shortly afterward as well, but not before saying some words of comfort to Kushina, while the whole time Ugao looked on. What nightmare could it be that it would frighten one S-rank kunoichi, an S-rank shinobi, and an A-rank one? She thought to herself, as she left as well, but not before noticing what looked like a weapon similar to a naginata, only that the blade was broader and that it was ornately designed on the other side of Kushina's bed, which made her think that Kushina was learning how to use it and didn't bring it on her search for Naruto, because she wasn't proficient in using it yet. She also thought it must have been a trick of the light when the dragon on the blade glowed a little and the shadows seemed drawn to it. She then made a mental note to herself not to eat ramen and drink sake after 12 a.m. And unknown to anyone, even Kushina, was that the beginnings of two black and green vine-like tattoos appeared on her left ankle and right wrist, giving off both a pleasant and foreboding feeling to anyone who would pay attention to them in the future. Unknown location, so they think I'm not real, huh? Fools, I will show them. The nightmare for Kushina is only going to get so much worse before getting better. For me, that is muahahahaha. But don't worry, Kushi-chan, after I'm done with you, I'll make sure Sumi-chan gets hers too. After all, you both hurt my sweet, handsome Naru-chan. I'll be sure to make the both of you pay. But first I'll lay low for a bit longer. Don't want the damn Mindwalker to be tipped off this early in the game. Then at the end, Naru-chan, I will have you all to myself. Yes, I will. And no skank will have what is mine. Muahahahahahahahahaha. Outside the Namikaze, Uzumaki house. What did you want to talk to me about, Inoichi? Hiruzen said, as the both of them were walking towards the Yamanaka compound. It's about that nightmare, if it can actually be called that. Hokage-sama, did you notice that it seemed off to you, like I don't know that there was something else there? Inoichi asked, as when he was viewing it he noticed that the past demonic Kushina had, even though he didn't see it, he was sure. She glanced several times at where Kushina was, and not just when Kushina originally had the nightmare, but after, when Kushina and Hiruzen had reviewed it, twice for himself and Kushina and once for Hiruzen. Not really, other than it seemed lifelike. You're just overthinking this, Inoichi, Hiruzen said, as he thought that all the guilt that Kushina kept inside all these years was beginning to come out. He also thought that the nightmare was that bad because she had recently learned some of the truth about what was happening to her son over the years, and that her subconscious mind created a worst-case scenario, so to speak, for her fears. And in most cases he would be right. I guess so. But I'm still going to schedule several appointments for her just to be on the safe side, Inoichi replied, while beginning to walk to his house. And as he was doing so, deep inside himself he couldn't help but feel a sense of dread swell up inside him. Back in the Forest of Death, or known as Training Ground 44. As morning came over the compound in the Forest of Death, one silver-haired Jinchuriki was still sleeping as the door to his room opened. Two pairs of eyes that were blue-green and magenta, though they had pink flecks in them, peeked inside and saw the human on the bed. Naruto remained asleep on the bed, unaware of the two figures headed towards him. When they arrived at the foot of the bed, they crouched down, and then as one, leapt on the sleeping 7-year-old. The results were obvious. Ah! Naruto screamed, as he felt the weight of something furry and smelt like the forest land on him. What the? Hey! Get off of me! The two things that attacked him were two wolf pups. They were colored the same way as the other wolves he saw last night. But there were some differences. One had black markings under its magenta-colored eyes, and had black highlights in its fur as well as 4 black socks, while the other had red markings under its blue-green eyes, as well as red highlights in its fur and 4 red socks. Hey, come on! Get off! Naruto shouted again. It was then that the pup with the blue-green eyes spoke to him, in a young girl's voice. Shikan Itoko-sama sent us to get you, so up and at him, the pup shouted, and then proceeded to grab him, by biting his hand and dragging him out of the bed. Ow! Let go of my hand, the silverette shouted again, but the young pup ignored him and continued to pull Naruto out of the room with the other wolf pup following right behind. They led Naruto out of the castle, down the main road where they passed a few of the silver, white, and platinum-haired people going about their day and saw the comical scene amusing, before exiting the compound. Where the wolves outside of the gate also saw the comical scene, and Naruto swore that he heard some of them snickering. It was 2 hours later before they arrived at the base of a large hill, that in itself was tiny compared to the mountains behind it. with a cave opening big enough for something a bit larger than the size of a boss summoned to enter into. Outside the cave was Shakan, along with 2 other wolves, and unlike the guard wolves at the castle, these were at least 50 meters long, though were still diminutive compared to the size of the cave opening. The young pups brought the runaway Silverette in front of Shakan, who looked on with a neutral gaze. "I assume you slept well, child," Shakan said, while Naruto, who was rubbing the back of his hand and glaring at the female wolf pup who had dragged him the whole way, nodded. "Yeah, I did," he said, "but did you have to send these little hellions to get me? I swear I thought that she was going to rip my hand off." Said pup only gave an innocent look. "I was only doing as I was told," she said sweetly, and before Naruto could make a retort, Shakan stopped them. "You'll both have enough time to maul each other later," the she-wolf said. "For now, the alpha wishes to see you, child." Naruto frowned at that. "My name is Naruto, you know," he said, and the she-wolf looked at him. "Of course," she said. "Now, follow me, Naruto." Naruto's eyes slightly twitched at that. "Geez, does she have to talk like a drone?" Me muttered, only for Shakan to answer. "I heard that. Oh, and you too. I heard from someone that you skipped out on her lessons yesterday. I'll be sure to tell her later about what you did," she said, and Naruto felt a sudden chill go down her spine, while if he was looking and paying attention to his surroundings he would have seen the pups pale several shades and the 2 guards to snicker slightly, while one of them whispered something about being busted to the other. However, a yawn inside Naruto's mind then got his attention. "It would be best not to piss her off, Naruto-kun," Thea said, as she stretched within his mindscape. "She could tear us limb from limb. And I prefer to live long after I get my final tail." Naruto mentally gave his eternal companion the equivalent of a deadpan stare inside his mindscape. "You're not helping here," he thought, as he followed the she-wolf inside the cave opening which led to a tunnel, with the now 2 cowed wolf pups, who each sent a glare to the guard wolves shutting them up, following behind him. For 50 minutes, they walked through the tunnel, and Naruto was curious why they had not experienced total cave darkness yet, as well as why he felt as if he was going downhill. Before he could ask, he saw light at the end of the tunnel, and soon the group of 3 wolves and 1 avatar, a name he dubbed himself to be different from the known Jinchuriki, arrived in what appeared to be an enormous cavern, with a hole in the ceiling allowing sunlight to enter. Naruto looked around and saw more wolves, who were warily looking at him, along with numerous eyes watching him from the shadows of the cavern, especially one pair that caught Naruto's attention for some reason, and made him cautious from the way that they were showing no hostility. "Well, at least they're not trying to eat me yet, Naruto," though, while Thea suddenly admonished him. "Don't jinx us, Naruto-kun," the young goddess shouted. "Anything that could happen, will happen." "Geesh, fine, I'm sorry," Naruto replied with a roll of his eyes. His thoughts were interrupted as he saw Shakan stop in front of a formation of rocks that looked like a podium. The avatar stopped walking as soon as Shakan did, and the group waited until a massive wolf with black fur even bigger than Gamabunta appeared out of the shadows. It looked grizzled, as well as having a beard, and the majority of its top right fang was missing. It gazed down at the starlight-haired boy with eyes that were beady and completely blank, not showing irises and pupils that were surrounded by large, round pools of shadow. And they were the eyes that showed no hostility at the boy, only curiosity. "Well, young human," the wolf said in a gruff, but strong voice, "I'm impressed how you managed to survive the forest where we made our home, ever since Shakan informed me about you. But I am curious about why you came into the forest, when others have second thoughts." Naruto gave a sigh. Somehow he knew that explaining his story would make things a little troublesome. And as he thought that, he swore he could have heard 2 people sneezing from where he was, followed by the sound of a frying pan smacking something, then a grunt. Another unknown location. It was black, that was all IT could see. And although IT didn't know why, or how IT came into being, it knew for some reason that it was disgusted with something, and that IT didn't like what IT was disgusted by, so IT decided to go back to sleep. Hopefully whatever IT was disgusted by would be away or gone out of its current sensing capability range, but if whatever IT was disgusted by was still around. IT didn't have an answer for the moment, but would when IT woke up again. And in the meantime, IT, while going back to sleep, would somehow need to figure out how to learn how IT came into being, and figure out where IT was. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed this video. If you do, please leave a like, share and subscribe. Also don't forget to support author of this fanfic. So let's end this video here. Until then, see you in next video.